Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the 2020 Road to the Kentucky Derby series. On Saturday at the fairgrounds, they have two Derby preps taking place. There was supposed to be one, but the Risen Star was oversubscribed, so they've split it into two divisions. In this video, I'll take a look at the first division, which goes as race 12 on that fairgrounds Saturday card. I'm doing another video to go over the second division, race 13. But for this one, we're going to focus on the one where a lot of the horses in this division of the Risen Star are coming out of the Grade 3 Lecomte, which was the prep for this race. It just so happens, given the random draw, that a lot of the horses that came out of the Lecomte have wound up in this division. We'll see how they end up betting this race. I would imagine that the horse to beat is going to be the number 8 Enforceable, who was the Lecomte winner. But there are 11 horses in this half of the race, so a pretty competitive field signed on, a lot of horses to consider. I'll go through all of those trips coming out of the Lecomte in just a second. But before we get to those contenders, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector for this race. You see that the number 6, that's Sha Sha Shake Me Up, is predicted to be on the early lead over the number 3, Ready to Roll, and the number 7, Blackberry Wine, in a situation where a fast pace is predicted. Now, I want to talk about that a little bit. I don't like when people say that they disagree with the pace projector, because the pace projector is just a representation of the pace data for all of these horses. But I do think that you want to take a look at who's involved in the early lead in this pace projector and just think about if there might be another scenario that could play out here, because the number 6, Sha Sha Shake Me Up, does seem like a pretty likely leader in this race. He was contesting the pace in the Lecomte last time. But the number 3, Ready to Roll, only showed speed in a maiden race last time at Oaklawn Park. I'm not sure how much speed that horse really projects to show. And the number 7, Blackberry Wine, has been successful in gate-to-wire fashion in the past, but he's not a really fast horse, and I think he'll be fine stalking the pace in this race. And the others behind them just aren't really front-running types, so I'm not going to be shocked if there's not a fast pace in this race. I think it'll be honest enough. I don't think it's going to favor horses near the lead, but I don't think it's going to be a situation that significantly favors closers, and that might work against the number 8 Enforceable, who I'd imagine would be the favorite in this race. And let's take a look at his past performances. I'm going to start by taking a look at the 4 horses coming out of the Lecomte and discuss all of their trips. Enforceable probably got the best trip in the Lecomte. He did lose some ground coming around the far turn, but you see that red color-coded pace figure at the second call. The pace of the Lecomte was fairly quick, and it fell apart towards the end. And Enforceable made this unencumbered outside run, never got stopped in traffic. I thought Julien Leparoux commenced the move at just the right time, that he was able to take over the race in deep stretch and hold sway over some horses who had a little trouble in behind him. I just think everything worked out for this horse last time. And can he work out at the same trip in this Risen Star? Maybe, but I don't think he has a significant edge over some of the horses that are coming out of the Lecomte. And if they bet the race like he's really the horse to beat coming out of that race, I'd want to look for some more value. He can definitely win this race. I just think that others project to be similar type of likely winners at much better odds. So I'd rather look elsewhere for the winner of this Lecomte. Another horse that I would consider strongly coming out of that race is the number 2, Silver State. He was second to Enforceable in the Lecomte last time. And while he saved more ground coming around the far turn, I think Ricardo Santana was trying to do the right thing and keep him in behind horses for as long as possible before swinging out once they got into the straightaway. But horses were backing up into his face by the time they got to the quarter pole. So Silver State did lose some significant momentum when you compare his trip to that of Enforceable coming to the top of the stretch in the Lecomte. He ultimately did find his way to the outside after altering course multiple times, but he lost some momentum in the process and had to sort of make a second run after Enforceable once he finally got into the clear in the final 1/8 of a mile. I can see some people saying that his trip was better than Enforcable's. It really is a close call. I think he had a slightly tougher trip, so I would prefer him a little bit coming out of that race, and maybe he gets a little bit ignored because he's a horse that really was heavily supported in the Lecomte. I think some people were a little disappointed by the fact that he didn't win that race, but I think he still has upside in just his 4th career start. They're running this Risen Star going a mile and an 1/8 this year. He doesn't strike me as a horse that's going to have any problem with that distance, so I view him as a major contender in this race. The 3rd place finisher in the Lecomte was the number 9 horse in this race, Mr. Monomoy. And Mr. Monomoy, I think you can make the case that he ran one of the better races in the Lecomte because he was the closest to that fast pace of the horses that finished towards the front end at the very end of the race. He also had some trouble coming to the top of the stretch. I mentioned those traffic issues down towards the inside. side. He was right in the thick of that because he was trying to split horses coming to the 3/16 pole, had to pause briefly. I thought he did well to bull his way through towards the end, but again, kind of like Silver State, he had to regain that momentum after making his way out of traffic trouble by the 8th pole and was actually gaining some ground on Enforceable at the end of that race. I thought it was a really game performance. He's another horse that was heavily backed in the Lecomte last time, which is no surprise. He's got a pedigree that makes him pretty popular. He's a half-brother to the champion 3-year-old filly from a couple of years ago, Mr. Monomoy Grill, rather. So he definitely has upside coming out of that race. Just think he's a horse that a lot of people like coming out of the Lecomte, and I'm not sure he's going to be that big of a price. I will definitely use him, though, because he did run really well last time. One horse who could get a little bit forgotten coming out of the Lecomte is the number 11 here, Scabbard. If you're looking for a horse that had a real indisputable troubled trip in the Lecomte, it's this horse, because while he did save ground for much of the race and was in a pretty good position in mid-pack down the backstretch, once they came around the far turn, Corey Lannery just could really never find a clear path for this horse. They got into the stretch and he was trying to follow Mr. Monomoy through a hole, but didn't really materialize. It closed up. He ended up getting totally stopped in traffic a couple of times, had to bull his way through to just try to get 4th place towards the end of the race, encounter traffic trouble again there. He just never really had a chance to sustain any momentum and didn't really put forth his best effort. Now, you might say that Scabbard is just heading in the wrong direction because he also disappointed too back in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He's yet to really run back to that encouraging 2nd place finish in the Iroquois when he finished behind Dennis's Moment, who a lot of people thought was the best 2-year-old from last season. Now, also, Scabbard has a pedigree that says maybe a mile and an eighth they're going in this race is not going to be his best distance because there really is more sprint pedigree on the dam side. I know that all of those might be negatives, but he did have trouble last time, so I don't want to totally discount this horse. I would use him underneath. I'm not totally confident that he can win this race, especially if the pace doesn't materialize, as I think it might not, because he's a dead closer, but he's one that I would definitely use somewhere in the exotics. There are a couple of horses that have not yet faced stakes company that interest me quite a bit in this race. And the one that I like the most is the number 7 Blackberry Wine. He is going to be my pick in this race because he's just earned speed figures that suggest maybe he's a little better than the horses coming out of that Lecomte. If you go 3 back to that maiden win that he earned over a sloppy track in an off-the-turf race at Churchill Downs, I know he might not have been facing the toughest field considering it was an off-the-turf event, but you look at some of the horses that came out of that race, that speed figure of 105 that he earned totally holds up, and he backed it up last time when he came back on the dirt finally after they decided they're not going to try to make him into a turf horse anymore. He beat a good field in an allowance race back on January 18th. Now, that was the same day of the Lecomte, and he ran a faster time going the same distance, a mile and a 16th, than the Lecomte horses. If you go back to that November 30th race when he broke his maiden, he ran a faster time that day than the horses in the Kentucky Jockey Club on the same card. So he's now done this twice where he's run faster than stakes horses, and I think it checks out. I mean, those races look legitimately fast. Now, last time out in that allowance win at the fairgrounds, he beat a horse who's also in this race named Digital. Digital's a horse that will take money in this race. He's not one that I particularly like because I think he's more of a sprinting type, and the fact that Blackberry Wine was able to come back on that horse after getting passed by Digital in mid-stretch, I just kind of think speaks to the fact that Digital doesn't really want to go that far. But I thought Blackberry Wine showed a lot of grit to stay on in that race and be drawing away at the end after getting passed in the lane. He's not a horse who seems to need the lead because while he's won in gate-to-wire fashion in his 2 dirt routes, he's stalked the pace fine in his turf races. I don't think he's a really headstrong horse, so he'll be fine stalking outside of those 2 speed horses that I mentioned when I discussed the pace projector. And stretching out to the mile and an eighth distance, I think is what he's really going to benefit from because he's a half to this horse named Neo Classic, who won going as far as a mile and a quarter on the turf. His dam is a half to Tempera, who's a winner of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. This is a really classy Godolphin stamina-bred female family. So I think he's just coming into this race as potentially the best horse. He's beaten some solid company, and I think he's going to work out the right trip. So he just makes a lot of sense to me, and he's my top pick in this race. One more horse that I want to discuss is the number 5, Moon Over Miami, who's one of 2 horses that's shipping over from Gulfstream Park to this fairgrounds venue for Bill Mott. The other one's in the other division of this race. But I think Moon Over Miami of these 2 Mott horses is the more interesting one because let's take a look at his maiden win 2 back at Aqueduct when he won so impressively on the Cigar Mile undercard. Now, I don't know what was really in this race behind him, but he wins pretty impressively. He was stalking the pace early on over a speed-favoring racetrack. He passes those 2 leaders and goes on to a pretty impressive impressive score here, beating another horse who's in this race, Farmington Road, who closes for second. Moon Over Miami, though, ran a speed figure in this maiden win that suggests he's on par with a lot of these stakes horses. Now, he came back out of this race and disappointed in an allowance race next time out at Gulfstream Park. He was bet down to 8-5 odds and just didn't really do a whole lot of running. But I think he had an excuse in that last race because that was just dominated on the front end by the winner, New York Traffic, going a mile and 16th, which is that configuration at Gulfstream where they head right into the first turn. There's a short stretch run. Horses that lose ground or towards the back of the pack seem to be at a disadvantage, and he was breaking from the outside post, didn't break that well, was just sort of out in no man's land, losing ground for the entire race. I don't think that's a true indication of his ability, and the fact that Bill Mott is stepping him up out of that race to try Stakes Company is a sign of confidence. So I think this horse deserves another chance, and he's likely to be a pretty big price in this race. So I'll definitely use him in the mix, though as I said, my pick in this race is the number 7 Blackberry Wine. He should be a bettable. Use him in the exotics with horses like the number 2 Silver State, the number 5 Moon Over Miami, the number 9 Mr. Monomoy, and even the likely favorite Enforceable, and that horse coming with the trouble coming out of the Lecomte, Scabbard. I'd throw them all in the mix underneath, but I think that Blackberry Wine is the most likely winner, and he's going to offer some decent value, so he's my pick in the first division of the Risen Star.